introducing Tatyana McFadden, who I believe is still the fastest woman in the world. Congratulations for that, Tatyana.
Thank you.
And you're also, I believe you have 20 Paralympic medals, 24 world championships, and of course, world records. And most importantly, you're on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. So congratulations for that. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Alysia Montano, who I believe you're a 2-time world champion, and you also are a 7-time US champion, as well as, of course, an Olympic gold medalist. And my favorite, you competed while you were 8 months pregnant. So welcome to you.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, let me start a little bit with your stories, because I think they're fascinating. I'm going to start with you, Tatyana. Tell us a little bit about how you got into sport. And I know that you've faced a number of obstacles along the way.
It's a very unique story how I got into sports. So I was born with spina bifida, which is a hole in your back and your spinal column is sticking out. And I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia in 1989. So in the time of fall of communism. And I didn't get my back operated on until 20 days later. Any child that was born with a disability during that time, that was the wait. We had to wait 20 days and then we were counted as a human. And shortly after birth, I was put into orphanage number 13. They were numbered, they weren't named anything special. So I was chosen lucky number 13. And at the time, my birth mom could not financially take care of me. And so I lived there for this first 6 years of my life. I didn't have the proper nutrition, no schooling, no doctor's appointments. I didn't have a wheelchair. And so how I got around the orphanage, because I couldn't walk, was that I scooted on the floor. I walked on my hands. I was a kid that was stubborn and wanted to be just like all the other kids and wanted to play with everyone. So that's how I got around. And the 6th year changed when my mom happened to come into the orphanage. And during that time, she ran her own adoption agency called ICA. And she was there purely on a work trip. And I felt like it was faith that brought us together at that moment. Families constantly always came into the orphanage, but they were looking for healthy babies. They weren't looking for a sickly child with a challenging disability. And so that year changed my life forever. And before I knew it, I was on to the plane to the US. And a lot of first things happened. I had 10 surgeries on my legs because they were atrophied behind my back. And so I needed to straighten them out so I could sit in a wheelchair and, lay in a bed and get into a racing chair as well. So that was much later in life. And what was the thing that saved me was starting sports. And my parents put me into sports because they knew that was the healthy way for me to get better. I was really, really anemic and a pretty sick kid growing up. And so they thought, why not? We'll put her in a local para sports club in Baltimore called the Bennett Blazers. And from there, I tried everything. I did ice hockey, downhill skiing, wheelchair basketball, table tennis, and finally I tried wheelchair racing. And I really loved it, and I took to it, and I practiced every single day in that racing chair. It was a little yellow racing chair. And what I noticed about doing sports on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, when I was getting healthier and not only physically stronger, but mentally stronger. So it gave me the ability to dream for the first time as a kid. When you ask a 5-year-old, when you ask a 7-year-old what they want to be, they say, oh, like a teacher or fighter. They have an idea.
It's interesting. One of the things that struck me, because both of you have really encountered unique obstacles along the way, was your ability to actually join sports teams and discovering that, people with disabilities was a different set of rules. When did that come in to play? Because I know legislation has been a big part of what you've been a fighter for, equal rights for athletes with disabilities to compete.
Yes. So when I came home from the Paralympics and in Athens in 2004, I was just 15 years old. And so I wanted to start, I wanted to do high school. I mean, that was important for me and my family. And I didn't know what was about to come. And high school is a non-tryout sport. I was denied to practice. I was denied a uniform. I had to take a separate bus. Everything that I did was separate, and I was not allowed to participate on my high school track team. And I thought, if this is the way that we're treating people with disabilities in the 21st century, what are we teaching high school students today?
Yeah.
So when they get older, they're going to be, their thought process is it's okay not to hire a person with a disability, because we learned when we were younger that it's okay to segregate people with disabilities because they weren't allowed to participate on my high school team. And being that 15-year-old and having a silver and bronze medal, I was like, well, I'm going to be that voice. I want to make that change. And I also thought about my younger sister, Hannah, who's also a Paralympic athlete, and she was in London Games and she was in Rio. And so we were the two sisters that were competing on track and field for the first time in history
Get on our
ever.
high school team. It's incredible. It's,
Yeah. So,
one
yeah.
thing I want to talk about the role of legislation, because I know you've had some gains there. I want to go to you, Alysia, and talk about your own experience and trajectory, especially, what happened when you made the decision to compete pregnant, because that had a lot of repercussions for you.
Well, for me, growing up, sports has been a huge confidence builder. I think that it's so important for everyone to participate in sport. And so for girls, we saw a lot of all the campaigns where everything like, I want to be like Mike. It was all of this stuff that was like male athletes were the ones to be, held on top of a podium or on a pedestal. And it's like girl athletes were like, oh, maybe if you want to kind of try this, but like behind all of us. And so for me, I've always been motivated to just continue the trajectory of my life, knowing that sports have been such a space for me that brought on such happiness and confidence and taught me to be a good teammate and, let me dig into pieces of myself that I may have not otherwise found if I didn't have sport. So as I progressed in sport from a young athlete that is playing into a space where it's more competitive. And then now, running fast enough and well enough to become a professional athlete and become an Olympian. I'd always, known that for me, I always, as anybody, deserve an opportunity towards happiness. And as we strive for our goals, there's never any reason for anybody to be stifled that opportunity of joy. And so for me, as I grew, I'm 21 when they start talking about professional sports, and I'm definitely not thinking about having kids. I'm 100% like, I just want to make Olympic teams. I want a medal. I want to make, it's just not a part of the thought process for me. It wasn't like, oh, if I become a professional athlete and I'm pursuing Olympic dreams, where does motherhood fit into this? And as I progress and I see, I also want this part of my life to be something I can do as I continue to have my career. So I don't feel like I needed to have one or the other. I started to kind of have conversations with other athletes, and it was like, I call it our coffee talk conversations. It's the ones that were like taboo to have in the industry with your athlete manager, with whatever sponsor that you had. And I recognized that the common denominator was everybody wanted to talk about it, but felt like they couldn't because there was no contractual language that actually protected us. And
when you decided to compete, what made you decide to compete when you were 8 months pregnant? I know you were only 35 seconds, I think, off your time. Were you doing it to win, or were you doing it to make a point?
Well, that's exactly where I was going, was I was, knowing that conversation was behind the scenes. It was so important for me when I decided I was going to not only pursue a family for me, like having children, and continue my career. I recognized that we were all being silent about it because of the fear of it, and we hadn't seen it. So for me, it was like a space of demonstration, of showing like, here's what it looks like to be a woman in the industry that I work in and to continue on in my career. And if we continue to not talk about it out loud, if we continue to keep it under the rug, something that is totally natural and normal and can happen to, and for many people, then it won't ever be a space where we can open the door. So when I competed at 34 weeks pregnant, I had already been in these silent conversations with people that were whispering like, oh, her career is over. Oh, so-and-so did that. You know, they're not coming back. And I recognize that the reason why women always have caps on their career is because that's often around the same time the caps on women's career had been 30 years old. You know, they're like not going to be professional athletes after that. So like, let's start minimizing how much we pay them. And they slowly get kind of pushed out of the sports industry. And the reason why that had been like the standard is because there had been no protection for women athletes who also wanted to become moms. And really, when they did it, they would treat it as if they were no longer a viable athlete that was dedicated or cared about continuing to pursue sport at the highest level.
And
You know, go ahead.
And I think to Alysia's point is that we also have to remember the history of women in sports, with Title IX being only 15 years old, Title IX being 50 years old, and looking at Billie Jean King's history in women's and tennis sports. And as you look at, women fighting, it's across the sports, like track and field, and on the Olympic side as well. We've come a long way, but we still have so much far to go. And so I applaud you, Alysia. I know it was inspiring to watch. And I thought, wow, I'm going to do that same thing, because that was like,
I think it's great. I mean, it's interesting, the levers, and your point, I think you're right. It has not been that long since Billie Jean King fought. And there's some of the levers. I mean, what strikes me about the two of you is the power of the, can't be what you can't see. And so I love the fact that there's the consequences of what each of you did. And let's take even simple, to you, Tatyana, even talk a little bit about the legislation that passed. Joining your high school team seemed to be a higher hurdle for you than going to the Paralympics. I mean, what was that like, and what reaction did you get when you sort of were able to, conquer that?
So I think passing the legislation led me to conquer and fighting equality in Paralympics and in marathons, because there's still huge ongoing challenges besides joining the high school track team, which I didn't realize, I would, continue this further into my career. So it was actually a perfect setup. And it was completely the lack of education, right? The lack of education in women in sports and disability in sports. We can't forget, we have these wonderful conversations about gender inequality, but we always forget about people with disabilities as well. And so the high school fight was it was so hard, being so young and going through the emotional roller coaster. I mean, I was bullied for 4 years of my high school career, and people told me that I should participate in sports of my own kind. And so just hearing that, and it was hard. It was hard
to. You felt you had an unnatural advantage over other athletes. Is that what the bullying was about?
I think it was the lack of understanding, because in wheelchair racing, there is no gears. It's not a bike. So right there, it goes to show that they don't know about the sport. A racing chair is 20 pounds heavier. So imagine running with a waist belt on around your waist and sprinting for 100 meters and going around the track, one time, and then let alone doing a marathon. So it wasn't an advantage. And the judge knew that, and they said it was safety, but we have brakes on our racing chair, and athletes know how to handle their own racing chair before they go, to advance to track meets. So and
there's so much about people putting a cap on you before you get to even show them what you're capable of.
Exactly. And exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the part of it was that I was a woman fighting this. I feel like if I was a man fighting it, they'll be like, oh yeah, like let's add, men's division for the wheelchair racing. But because
Yeah.
I happen to be a female, using my voice and being so young and, fighting our county, then fighting the state, and then working with the Obama administration to make it federal. It was a long,
Huge call.
biggest
I mean, I want to hear, I want to get to part of the money question too, because I'm really curious, Alysia, when you ran pregnant, what were the financial repercussions? And can you talk a little bit about the fallout, positive and negative, from that experience?
Well, there was a lot, pre to all of that. So you're looking at your contract and races you're supposed to go to. And so you kind of fulfill that contract in a lot of ways. Nationals was on that list. So I'm like, I can check all of these spaces that I need to. I don't necessarily have to win anything. I'd like to, but I'm going to show up to nationals, and this is just what it looks like, in order to protect also the language within the contracts as they existed. But prior to that, I had been with a major company everybody knows about, and then moved over to another one.
No.
Looks like Mike, but doesn't
right.
sound
Okay.
And moved over to another major company. And what I recognize is that their standard contracts and how they looked were exactly the same. Everybody was using the exact same language in their contract. So after mentioning, hey, what would happen to hypothetically a woman who decided that they also wanted to have a baby? And it was just very cut and dry. We just paused her contract and stopped paying her. And that's just a shock to hear, literally this was not even considered something that you maybe should even sugarcoat, even how ridiculous that statement is to say.
Especially when women get so much less payoff and in sports already. I mean, it's
right.
Income for you. Go ahead. You were going to say something, Tatyana.
Oh, it's like the 70s, Alysia, where women, needed to be taken care of, or, because women started making sports debut then. And I feel like such a mantra that oh no, that's too hard for them, or they're going to break themselves.
Exactly. Deciding for them before, I'm helping you. Don't worry, this is why we're saying that. We would just it was something that was helping you. So moving into that space where I recognize oh, there's a very huge possibility that my income, how I am feeding myself and my family, and now adding to it is going to be compromised severely. But if I didn't take up space and be that person that was literally making this very obvious demonstration of what it looked like, I don't feel like we would be seeing the change that we're seeing today, where we are continuing to work through with major companies to standardize their contracts that protect a woman, whether she's planning it or not. The fact of the matter is it's about equity, and having our contracts, standardized contracts, are not standard for people who can also birth. And the standardized contracts are standard for men. And that's just how it's been existing for a very long time. And it's not a space in which we can continue to allow it to happen, because it is not a space of equality.
Before we go to final, takeaways for the audience, I would like to ask both of you about where we are today with women's sports. I mean, it doesn't get a lot of airplay on TV, relatively speaking. And we have, I was struck by the fact that when a woman athlete went into detention in Russia, it took a full month for us to realize it. I mean, so I'm showing my bias, I'm being honest. Where do you think we are? I mean, we've made so many advances. Are you optimistic? Are you feeling a real change right now, or frustrated? I'm going to go to first, Tatyana.
Oh, Tatyana.
Or actually, I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel, of course, optimistic, because we are having more women being supported to speak up and speak out. It is exhausting for us to be fighting for ourselves all the time when we're the marginalized group. And I do think it takes more of our men getting off the bench. It's just when we are our allies in general getting off the bench, able-bodied people getting off the bench, and fighting for one another. So it isn't this space where it's I'm the only one yelling and screaming and banging down doors. It's we have a collective group, making changes and having people recognize that are ultimately, oppressors, that we are not doing what we need to do in order to really see real, tangible change for the future.
Yep. Tatyana?
I am so optimistic and I see the positive change for women in sports, but I still don't see it for disabled women, right? So we are really far off the bar. But I feel like it will be a domino effect once we can make that change happen just for women in general. I really hope that it just falls in naturally for women with disabilities, because we have to remember that we're part of every subculture, every culture, and to remember that we need to be part of that discussion as well, because just like Alysia, we have contracts, we work with sponsors, we go do professional marathons and the Paralympics, and Tokyo for Team USA for me was the first time I received equal pay. I mean, we don't have equal pay for the marathons.
Incredible.
We're far off.
I mean, talk about the percentage difference of not only being a woman in pay and now being a person with a disability in pay.
Yeah.
In major marathons, like when that number, that stark difference of look at Tatyana's track record of her championship wins, and to recognize that she'd been paid like 10% of what an able-bodied person had been paid to win that amount of major championships in the same exact race, is just, it's you're right. We're completely missing the mark. And it's like picking one category at a time when it needs to be a collective change of what equity actually should be looking like.
Well, I think the holistic discussion is an important one. Any final, very quick sort of advice to anybody? Parting thoughts. I will go to you first, Tatyana.
Parting thoughts. I think I love being allies. I mean, I love being on this discussion with Alysia and meeting you for the first time. I've followed your career for years, but I mean, just getting to know the stories. And that's what I love investing in. I love reading about Alysia's story. I love reading about other female stories and being a collective voice, because we can move as one. We can, more numbers are so much greater than just one person just trying to be the voice, but being as a collective group, which is quite amazing.
Great. And Alysia, any final thoughts?
Oh, I mean, I have to share the exact same thought. Moving together is better than moving as one.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Tatyana, Alysia. You're both at the top of your game, and I think incredible role models. And yes, hopefully more progress to come.